I'm Carolyn Prasuti with the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. White rice is the world's most popular form of rice, but it goes through a milling process that removes many nutrients. As a result, people who eat a poor diet based on white rice may not get enough vitamin A. Each year, an estimated 250,000 to 500,000 children go blind from vitamin A deficiency. The World Health Organization says half of them die within a year of losing their sight. Vitamin A deficiency is a problem, especially in Africa and Southeast Asia. So scientists thought of an answer. They combined white rice with plant compounds that the body can change into vitamin A. The rice contains beta-carotene and other carotenoids. These plant colorings give the rice a golden color. The scientists also thought of a plan to give away this golden rice for free to poor farmers. But the rice is genetically engineered. They say it cannot be made using traditional methods to breed plants. The scientists worked for 10 years until 1990 to develop the technology to add genes to rice. Then it took 9 more years to get the genes they wanted into the seed. The first field tests took place in 2004 at Louisiana State University in the United States. Golden rice is currently being tested in the Philippines. It is still not available for general use. Co-inventor Ingo Petricus says rice with 2 added genes will be available in the year 2013. One gene comes from maize or corn, and the other from a soil bacterium. Mr. Petricus is retired from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. He blames the delays on too many rules about genetically modified crops. Opponents say such crops may cause environmental damage by breeding with conventional plants. Opponents also question the safety of biotech foods. Mr. Petricus says golden rice has never been shown to be unsafe for the environment or people. Many agriculture organizations support the project. But there are also critics, including researchers for the environmental group Greenpeace. Several months ago, they questioned whether golden rice could do much for vitamin A deficiency. They said releasing genetically modified rice in Asia could permanently change traditional rice varieties and wild ancestors of rice. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti. For more news about rice research, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Rice hulls, or husks, are the protective coverings on grains of rice. Rice with just its hull removed is brown rice. Rice without its hull, or bran, is white rice. Once rice is harvested, the hulls are out of a job. They may be taken to landfills or burned. Sometimes they are used to absorb waste in chicken houses. Other times they are used to amend soil. But a chemist in Texas has another idea. Rajan Vempati led a group that developed a new process to make rice hulls into ash. The idea is to replace some of the Portland cement traditionally used in making concrete. Portland cement is a material that holds together the sand and crushed stone in concrete. Rajan Vempati thinks rice hull ash could help the concrete industry produce less carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is released in cement manufacturing when fuel is burned and limestone is heated. The Portland Cement Association says the gas from the limestone is reabsorbed as concrete ages. But cement manufacturing produces around 5% of the carbon dioxide released by human activity worldwide. Carbon dioxide is one of the gases that may affect the climate by trapping heat. The process for making rice hull ash heats the hulls to 800 degrees centigrade. Carbon is driven out and fine particles of almost pure silica remain. The process releases some carbon dioxide, but Rajan Vempati says it would be reabsorbed into the soil naturally. Another inventor, Prasad Rangaraju, is an engineer at Clemson University in South Carolina. He tested the cement and says less could be used because the rice hull ash makes it a stronger building material. Also, the inventors say the light-colored material better reflects sunlight, so buildings would cost less to cool. The National Ready Mixed Concrete Association points out that using ash in cement is not a new idea. The ancient Romans discovered that volcanic ash made better cement. But the modern inventors say rice hull ash works better than other materials. They developed the process with money from the National Science Foundation. They have not yet brought it to market. Rice hull ash is already available, but the product is relatively costly. Cost, including transportation, may decide the success of the new technology. Using it could make the most sense in areas where farmers grow lots of rice and the hulls might just go to waste. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Seth DeBolt is a plant scientist at the University of Kentucky in the United States. He and other scientists wanted to find a source of fuel that poor people in rural areas of developing countries could use to make electricity. The United Nations Development Program says 1.5 billion people have no electricity. 1 billion others have an undependable supply. Professor DeBolt went on a study trip to rural Indonesia. He saw that everywhere he went, there was very little waste in the use of agricultural products. Everything that farmers grew was used for something. Even the remains of fruit that people did not eat were fed to chickens. Little waste meant there was little that could be used for fuel. Growing a separate fuel crop would take land away from food crops. That was something Professor DeBolt did not want to do. He says the people at most risk of energy poverty are often the same people who have food insecurity issues as well. Any change in food availability would hurt that group the most. But he found 2 items that were in plentiful supply and would not create competition between food and fuel. Coconut shells and mango pits are generally thrown out. Yet Professor DeBolt says they have a lot of energy stored in them. He says they have an excellent heating value, which he compares to coal of low to moderate grade. The same is true for the pit of an olive, peach, or cherry, or the shell of an almond or walnut. All someone needs is a way to release that energy. Seth DeBolt says a company in India, Husk Power Systems, is using small generators in villages to make electricity from rice hulls. The process used is called gasification. Heating plant matter in a low oxygen chamber releases gases. These can be burned in an engine that turns a power-generating turbine. Professor DeBolt says he and his team see possibilities for coconut and mango power. They published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It says these small-scale production systems could provide as much as 13% of the energy needs of a country like Indonesia. Other tropical countries with large crops of coconuts, mangoes, and similar fruit could benefit as well. But Professor DeBolt says this is not a perfect solution. There are technical questions, like how to safely deal with the hazardous waste that gasification can produce. And there needs to be money to get these projects started. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report in Special English. Gordon Sato traveled to Eritrea for the first time in 1985. The Japanese-American cell biologist wanted to see what he could do to help the people in their struggle for independence from Ethiopia. On his trip, he noticed that camels were eating the leaves of mangrove trees growing along the coast. He planted more mangroves so they could be used to feed livestock. But at first, all the new trees died. Then Gordon Sato observed that mangrove trees only grew naturally where there was fresh water some of the time. The fresh water provided minerals that salt water lacked. Gordon Sato found a way to provide these minerals. He put nitrogen, phosphorus, and iron into small plastic bags at the base of each tree. Holes in the bags released the minerals into the soil over time. The women in the village of Hargigo started to feed the leaves of the mangroves to their sheep and goats. But the animals were not producing enough milk for their babies. Gordon Sato asked the villagers to grind the remains of fish and spread this fish paste on the leaves. This provided protein for the sheep and goats so they could produce more milk. Today, there are more than 1 million mangrove trees around the village. Gordon Sato has also started a large garden in Mauritania to grow more mangrove trees. He says, you don't have to be brilliant to do useful work. All you have to have is moderate intelligence and determination, and you can make a contribution to this world. Gordon Sato called his work in Eritrea the Mansanar Project. The name is meant to honor Japanese Americans placed in the Mansanar relocation camp in California during World War II. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Farmers and gardeners have turned the soil for centuries, but many now believe in no-till or reduced tillage, a method also called conservation tillage. The Conservation Technology Information Center says 40% of American cropland used this method at last report. Tilling can remove weeds and the waste from last season's crops and help break down old plant material into fertilizer. But it can also increase the risk of soil erosion by rain or wind. Tilling also releases carbon dioxide from the soil into the atmosphere. No-till keeps carbon in the soil and avoids the release of heat-trapping gases from motorized equipment. It also keeps water in the soil and protects helpful organisms like earthworms. And it saves money on labor, machinery, and fuel. A recent study reported on almost 20 years of different tillage methods in the American states of Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska. The researchers say tillage makes soil less resistant to being broken apart by raindrops. They say no-till stores more soil carbon, which helps the soil particles stick together. They found that the first 2.5 centimeters of topsoil are up to 7 times stronger against rain than plowed soil. The study also noted that when tilled soil particles come in contact with air, soil organic matter is lost through the process of oxidation. The findings appeared in the Soil Science Society of America journal. Another recent study found that a single tillage does not harm yield or soil structure in land that is normally not tilled. Charles Wortman at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln says a one-time tillage may be used to correct a problem like aggressive weeds. His 5-year study appeared in the Agronomy Journal. Fabian Fernandez, a soil and plant nutrition expert at the University of Illinois, says no-till means less intensive labor. But he also says it does not mean an end to preparing the ground for planting. Jimmy Wagner works at the American Plant Garden Center in Bethesda, Maryland. He says hand tools like tilling forks, shovels, and thatching rakes require more work than a rotary tiller, but they work well and cost less. If you till, wait until the soil is warm and dry enough. If the soil stays together in a ball, it is too wet to till. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can find more agriculture reports at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Soybeans are eaten by people and fed to animals. Some farmers grow them to replace lost nitrogen in the soil. Soybeans were first grown in Asia thousands of years ago. Now scientists have a full genetic map of the soybean. This is the first genome completed for a member of the legume family. The genome will make it easier to target different qualities and develop improved crops. Sequencing the genes, organizing all of them in order, will save many hours of searching. It will make it easier to search for what each gene is responsible for. A report on the genome appeared in the journal Nature. Scott Jackson at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana, helped lead the study team. He says the kind of soybeans they studied have 46,000 genes. Between 70 and 80% of them, however, are copies of other genes. Some genes change or disappear over time. But Professor Jackson explains that soybeans have kept copies of most of their genes. This is fairly unusual for plants, he says, and extremely unusual for animals. Genes are organized along chromosomes. These contain molecules of DNA, the building blocks of life. The researchers found that the sets of chromosomes in soybeans have copied themselves at least twice. It happened almost 60 million years ago, and again 13 million years ago. Over time, genes develop changes known as mutations. Scientists can tell when these changes happened. The number of mutations over time helped the team estimate when the duplications in soybeans took place. The genome could help genetic engineers develop soybeans that are processed better by farm animals. Soybeans contain chemicals called phytates. These prevent the absorption of phosphorus in the diet. Pigs and chickens especially are affected. Undigested phosphorus in their waste can pollute water supplies. Genetic engineering has already reduced phytates in soybeans. Now, with the gene map, there could be further reductions. The genome could also help farmers avoid Asian soybean rust disease, a highly destructive fungus spread by the wind. The researchers say they found a gene for resistance to this disease. Now they have to find a way to use it. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. You can find transcripts, MP3s, and captioned videos of our reports at voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Investing in agricultural research and development can help poor countries fight hunger and poverty. A new study says investments in sub-Saharan Africa increased by more than 20% between 2001 and 2008. But the study also found that just a few countries were responsible for most of that growth. Nigeria was responsible for 1/3 of it. Ghana, Tanzania, Sudan, and Uganda also increased their spending. But 13 countries decreased their investments. Nyenka Bitma from the Washington-based International Food Policy Research Institute led the study. She says new technologies are needed to fight hunger. She says some countries, including Nigeria, have increased their investments after spending far too little in the past. She says it is a positive sign because it is more commitment from the government. But Nigeria had extremely low levels of agricultural research funding. She was there for the first time in 2000 or 2001. She visited institutes that could not function, she says. They did not even have a phone line or fuel for their cars or a working computer. Nigeria now has the largest agricultural research system south of the Sahara. But Nyanka Bintma says a better measure of progress is whether a country is spending more than 1% of its agricultural money on research. And in 2008, she says Nigeria was not doing that. Botswana, Burundi, Kenya, Mauritania, and Mauritius were spending more than 1%. So were Namibia, South Africa, and Uganda. Ms. Bitma examined levels of financing and employment at 370 research centers in 32 countries. She believes most countries depend too heavily on international donations to help pay for research. Many donations are short-term, she says, and the research often ends when the money has been spent. Ms. Bintma says countries must improve their higher education systems to get more qualified researchers. But the study found that new researchers are not being hired in some countries because of budget problems. At the same time, many older researchers are nearing retirement age. Private industry may be able to help if governments cut their spending. Some cooperatives, for example, raise money for research into important crops. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Prasuti. For more agricultural news and to learn English, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Experts say that agriculture provides 14% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions each year. The gases released include carbon dioxide, a major cause of global warming. 21 nations around the world recently joined forces to better understand and prevent greenhouse gas emissions from farms. The Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases was launched at the United Nations Conference on Climate Change. The meeting took place in Copenhagen, Denmark in December. Agricultural experts blame a number of farm activities for producing greenhouse gases. For example, animal waste and cattle digestive systems release methane gas. Fertilized soil and the burning of crop waste also release harmful gases into the air. Experts say some methods of tilling, turning the soil to prepare for planting, also release harmful carbon dioxide. An official of the European Commission's Directorate General for Research says, agricultural greenhouse gas emissions can be cut. She suggests feeding animals a diet designed to reduce emissions. The new Agricultural Research Group says, protecting against global warming is only part of its purpose. It says the world also needs to develop better farming methods to feed growing populations in poor countries. United States Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack said, no one single nation can fight agricultural greenhouse gas emissions and increase food production at the same time. This is why the alliance is important for combining resources and finding new ones. The United States Department of Agriculture will increase spending on farm emissions research by $90 million over the next 4 years. The total will reach $130 million The USDA will share the research with other countries in the Global Research Alliance on Agricultural Greenhouse Gases. The USDA will support researchers from developing countries that belong to the Alliance. Money from the Borlaug Fellowship Program will let the researchers study agricultural climate change with American scientists. Mr. Vilsack said that just as climate change has no borders, there should be no borders for research. And that's the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. You can comment on our programs at voaspecialenglish.com.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Chocolate comes from cocoa beans, and more than half of those beans come from 2 countries in West Africa. But the situation is not all sweetness for poor cocoa farmers in Ivory Coast and neighboring Ghana. The United States has announced $10 million for renewed efforts to end the worst forms of child labor in the cocoa industry in those countries. The grant will support efforts to reduce poverty so parents do not have to depend on the labor of their children. Another aim is to give children more access to education. The money will go toward a new framework of action related to an international agreement from 2001. That agreement is called the Harkin-Engel Protocol. American Senator Tom Harkin and Representative Eliot Engel led negotiations with the chocolate and cocoa industries. The Department of Labor announced the grant in September, along with $7 million promised by the international cocoa industry. The governments of Ghana and Ivory Coast have also promised resources and policy support for the new efforts. Kevin Wilcuts is an official in the Labor Department's Office of Child Labor. He says the agreement shows a common commitment to address the situation and to offer children better hope for the future through education. Don DeVries is with UTS Certified, a program that tries to create a fair marketplace for agricultural products. Mr. DeVries says some crops are grown closer to cities because they must be processed quickly. But he says crops like cocoa and coffee are often grown in very rural areas with more poverty and less enforcement of rules. Bama Athrea directs the International Labor Rights Forum. She says there has been an unwillingness to act that is driven by the business proposition of getting cheap child labor to produce cocoa. Larry Graham is president of the National Confectioners Association in Washington. He said, "Our industry is fully committed to helping even more cocoa farming families through this innovative partnership." Ivory Coast is the world's largest cocoa grower, but the country has been split in half since a failed overthrow in 2002 led to armed conflict. A long-delayed presidential election was held in October. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Agriculture Report. Bees add an estimated $18 billion a year to the value of American crops. They pollinate flowers that become fruits, nuts, and vegetables. But in recent years, honeybee colonies in the United States and Europe have been shrinking. Scientists have proposed different theories to explain what is known as colony collapse disorder. New research suggests that a commonly used group of insecticides could cause bees to have a hard time finding their way back to their hive. The new research looks at the use of pesticides called neonicotinoids. They were first used in the 1990s. They are now put on the seeds of many major crops around the world. The seedlings absorb the chemical as they grow. That means farmers do not need to spray a whole field. Instead, there is a little bit of insecticide inside each plant, including the pollen and nectar that the bees want. There is not enough pesticide to kill them, but the new research in the journal Science says it may harm them anyway. Researchers stuck microchips to the backs of the bees. These chips recorded the bees' movements as they came and went from their hive. The scientists fed some bees sugar water with a low dose of a neonicotinoid. The study found that these bees were about twice as likely not to return as other bees. Michael Henry from INRA, the French National Agriculture Research Institute, says the bees basically get drunk. He says intoxicated honeybees with those small doses may just get lost and are not able to find their way back home. For some crops around the world, wild pollinators like bumblebees are more important than honeybees. Dave Golson at the University of Stirling in Britain worked on another study in Science. He says the pesticides could help explain why bumblebee populations are also decreasing. He says there were 85% fewer queens produced than when they had been exposed to what he called realistic field levels. Bayer Crop Science makes neonicotinoid pesticides. Company spokesman Jack Boyne disputed the findings. He says the authors dosed the bees at levels far greater than what would commonly be experienced in the field. He also notes that researchers are studying other factors that could affect bee populations. Some European countries have banned the pesticides, and there are growing calls to ban them in the United States as well. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Agriculture Report. Scientists have discovered the genetic secrets of two unpopular members of two favorite food families. They hope the discoveries will produce tastier tomatoes and stronger rice. The scientists discovered the complete set of genetic information of African rice and wild tomatoes. They published their studies in 2 reports in the journal Nature Genetics. There are good reasons African rice and wild tomatoes have not been popular. Asian rice is more productive and easier to process than African rice. And the wild tomato is poisonous. Rod Wing is a plant biologist at Arizona State University. He helped map the African rice genes. He says African rice can grow in salty and even poisonous soil, and it can also grow around weeds and in extremely dry conditions. He says this strength is increasingly important as climate change makes crop production more difficult. Scientists can now identify the genes that control what is good about African rice and combine those genes with Asian rice. They will be able to make better rice faster. The wild tomato also has some good qualities. Scientists found that it can grow in salty as well as very dry conditions, like the African rice. The map identifies the genes that may be responsible for these qualities. Bjorn Usadel is with Germany's RWTH Aachen University, which also took part in the mapping. Mr. Usadel says researchers also found differences in the genes of wild and farm-grown tomatoes that taste and smell. He says this could help scientists improve the flavor of tomatoes. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.